The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the trees, carrying with it the bite of oncoming winter. Martha Langley clutched her daughter tighter to her chest as she stepped out of the creaking door of the Langley estate for the last time. Her arms were sore, her face drawn, and her eyes red-rimmed not from the cold, but from the injustice that had just been laid upon her. Her husband, Jonathan Langley, had died only a week earlier, a sudden fever taking him before the doctor could even arrive. In the aftermath of his death, Martha had expected grief, mourning, and perhaps a temporary numbness to the world. What she hadn't expected was the venomous cruelty of her in-laws. Gertrude Langley, Jonathan's mother, had wasted no time in making it clear that Martha was no longer welcome. "You were never truly one of us," she had said, her voice as brittle as ice. "Now that my son is gone, so too is your place here." The estate, the land, the home, everything had been promised to Jonathan. But with him gone, the inheritance passed to his elder brother, Nathaniel. He had always looked upon Martha with disdain, considering her unworthy of the Langley name. Martha's pleas had fallen on deaf ears. Her belongings had been unceremoniously packed into a cart. Her daughter, Emily, only 5 years old, clung to her side, asking repeatedly why they had to leave. Martha could only say that they were going to find a new home, though in truth she had no idea where to go. The road that led away from the Langley estate was long, unpaved, and flanked by dark forests. The few coins Martha had were barely enough for provisions. The nearest town was several miles away, and no one there would likely offer refuge to a widow with no family of her own. They walked through the snow, which fell more steadily as day turned into night. Emily's feet began to drag, and Martha lifted her, wrapping her shawl tighter around both of them. Her heart ached for her daughter, for the future that seemed uncertain and bleak. By dusk, Martha spotted the outline of a small abandoned cabin nestled at the edge of the woods. It was falling apart, the roof sagging under the weight of old snow, but it offered some protection from the bitter wind. She used a piece of flint she had taken from the estate to start a small fire in the hearth, and she and Emily huddled close, trying to keep warm with the few scraps of food they had. Martha did not sleep. She couldn't. The reality of her situation gnawed at her. The cold, the hunger, the danger of being alone in the wilderness. But she was determined. For Emily, she would endure. Meanwhile, in the depth of the forest, a man named Elias Granger watched the firelight flicker through the trees. He had lived alone in the woods for nearly 20 years, ever since he returned from the war and found his family gone and his village unwilling to accept the man he had become. Elias was a reclusive settler. People in the nearby towns spoke of him in whispers. Some said he was a ghost, others a madman who had killed his own kin. The truth was less dramatic, but no less sorrowful. Elias had seen the worst of humanity on the battlefield and had chosen solitude over society. He rarely ventured beyond his homestead, but the sight of smoke where there should be none piqued his interest. He took up his rifle and trudged through the snow, cautious but curious. What he found changed the course of his life. At dawn, Martha awoke to the sound of a twig snapping outside the cabin. She tensed, heart pounding. Clutching Emily to her side, she peeked through the cracks in the wall. A tall man stood just beyond the doorway, a rifle slung over his back, his beard thick with frost. His eyes met hers, dark, wary, and tired. "I don't mean harm," he said in a deep voice. "Saw your fire. This place has been empty for years." Martha hesitated. She could run. But where? There was nothing but miles of forest behind her, and Emily was too weak to travel further. She swallowed her fear and opened the door slightly. "My daughter and we've been turned out. We only meant to rest for the night. We'll leave." Elias raised a hand. "A child in this cold?" You'll both die out here." She said nothing, but the defiance in her eyes told him she had not come this far to surrender. "There's a better shelter a ways from here," he said finally. "Come with me. If not for yourself, for her." Martha looked down at Emily, her cheeks pale from the cold, her lips trembling. She nodded. And so, the widow and her child followed the reclusive settler into the forest, unaware that fate had just intervened in the most unexpected of ways. The journey to Elias Granger's homestead was arduous. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing the world in a still, suffocating silence. Elias led the way with practiced ease, his steps sure and deliberate, as if he knew every tree and trail in the dense woodland. Behind him, Martha struggled to keep pace, her legs aching and numb, her child cradled close beneath her threadbare cloak. Emily whimpered from time to time, her small body trembling with cold. Martha whispered reassurances into her ear, though her own spirit teetered on the edge of collapse. Every step felt like a question. Was this a mistake? Could they trust this man? But Elias said nothing more than necessary, pausing only to help them over fallen logs or through thick drifts of snow. He didn't speak of his past, nor ask about theirs. His presence was stern, quiet, and unyielding. After what felt like hours, the trees parted to reveal a modest cabin nestled in a clearing. It was sturdier than the ruin they had left behind, with smoke curling from a stone chimney and a small shed nearby for firewood. A pair of goats huddled beside the structure, and chickens pecked under the snow for scraps. "Get inside," Elias said, unlatching the heavy wooden door. The warmth hit Martha like a wave. Inside, the hearth blazed, casting a golden glow across the room. There was a small table, a rocking chair, shelves stacked with jars of preserves, and a cot in the corner. "You'll sleep there," Elias said, pointing to the cot. "The girl, too." "I'll take the floor." Martha opened her mouth to protest, but he waved her off and began removing his snow-caked boots. "You need rest. We'll talk later." For the first time in days, Martha allowed herself to collapse onto the bed. Emily curled beside her, quickly drifting off into a deep, exhausted sleep. Days passed. Elias said little, but he provided food, simple meals of stew and bread, eggs from his hens, and occasionally game from the forest. He tended to chores with mechanical precision, always keeping a careful distance from Martha and her daughter. Martha, however, began to take part. She cleaned dishes, swept the floor, and helped gather firewood. Emily recovered quickly and often sat near Elias, watching as he carved figures from wood or mended tools. One evening, as snow whipped against the window panes and the fire crackled, Martha finally broke the silence. "Why are you out here?" Elias looked up from his carving. He considered the question for a long time. "I used to be a soldier," he said at last. "Came back to nothing. People feared me, called me cursed. I found peace here." Martha nodded. "Peace is a rare thing." She told him about Jonathan, about the Langley estate, about Gertrude's cruel ultimatum. She didn't weep, there were no tears left, but her voice trembled with the weight of it all. Elias listened, silent and unmoving. "You didn't deserve that," he said finally. "Neither did your daughter." They said nothing more that night, but something shifted between them, a fragile bond forged by shared suffering. As winter wore on, the three became a strange sort of family. Elias remained gruff and quiet, but he softened toward Emily, even carving her a small wooden doll. Martha, in turn, found herself smiling again, laughing even, as Emily danced around the cabin with childish joy. But peace was not destined to last. One morning, Elias returned from the forest with a grim expression. "Tracks," he said. "Riders. 4 of them. Armed." Martha's heart sank. "They're looking for us." Likely your in-laws, looking to tie up loose ends. Emily clung to her mother, eyes wide. Elias loaded his rifle. We'll be ready. That night, Martha sat beside the fire, clutching Emily close. Elias stood watch by the window, his silhouette framed by flickering light. "We have to leave," she said. "We can't bring this to you." Elias shook his head. "You're not alone anymore." The fire crackled between them, a symbol of warmth and newfound hope in a world that had nearly forgotten them. And somewhere in the darkness, horses galloped ever closer. The morning came cloaked in a thick mist, shrouding the forest in silence. Elias Granger stood outside his cabin with his rifle in hand, his eyes scanning the tree line. He had been up all night, alert to the faintest sound. Inside the cabin, Martha and Emily waited, the little girl bundled in furs, unaware of the storm gathering just beyond the clearing. The riders arrived shortly before noon. 4 of them, as Elias predicted. Nathaniel Langley sat atop a black gelding, his face twisted into a sneer beneath his thick wool scarf. The others were hired guns, rough men with cold eyes and quicker triggers. Elias stepped forward, calm and firm. "You've come far for a woman and a child." Nathaniel sneered. "That woman's a thief. She ran off with my brother's possessions and brought shame to the Langley name. I'm here to set things right. You set her out in the snow to die." Elias's voice held no anger, only truth. "That's not justice. That's murder." Nathaniel's horse stamped the ground. "This is none of your concern, old man. Step aside." Elias didn't move. His rifle remained lowered, but there was a deadly resolve in his posture. "Turn back. You're not taking them." One of the hired guns dismounted, his hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip. "I've heard stories about you," he muttered. "The ghost of the pines. Thought you were just a myth." Elias's voice dropped. "You should have kept believing." What followed was chaos. The hired gun drew first, but Elias was faster. The crack of his rifle shattered the silence. The man dropped, clutching his shoulder. The other 2 fired blindly into the trees, but Elias had already moved, vanishing behind a trunk, a ghost in the snow. Martha, hearing the shots, pulled Emily into the cellar below the floorboards. She prayed silently, heart pounding, every second feeling like an hour. Outside, Elias fought like a man with nothing left to lose. He downed another attacker with a shot to the leg, then tackled the third before disarming him with a swift strike to the jaw. Nathaniel, seeing his men fall, turned his horse to flee, but Elias stepped into his path. "This ends here," he growled. Nathaniel raised a pistol, but Elias shot it from his hand. The man screamed, clutching his wrist. Snow fell softly around them, muffling the echoes of violence. "I should kill you," Elias said, "but I'm not like you." He dragged Nathaniel to the cabin and forced him to sit before the hearth. Martha emerged, Emily in her arms. Her eyes widened at the sight of her brother-in-law, bruised and trembling. "You'll write a statement," Elias said, tossing a pen and paper onto the table. "You'll sign over any claim to the estate. You'll confess to your actions. And if I refuse—" Elias leaned closer. "Then you'll disappear into the woods and never come out." Nathaniel wrote. By spring, the Langley estate had changed hands. The document, notarized by the town magistrate, had ensured Martha's legal claim. The in-laws, disgraced and humiliated, left quietly. No one mourned their departure. But Martha did not return. She chose instead to remain in the forest, close to the man who had risked everything to protect her and her child. Elias rebuilt a second cabin nearby, giving them privacy but remaining close. Emily thrived in the wilderness, learning to track animals and plant vegetables. She called Elias uncle, and he smiled more often than not. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Martha joined Elias on the porch. "You saved us," she said softly. Elias shook his head. "You saved me." The wind rustled through the pines, carrying with it the scent of blooming wildflowers and the promise of a new beginning. For the widow and her child, the forest was no longer a place of exile. It was home.